Today we're going over the most extreme escapes from captivity in human history. Number 8. Stockholm Syndrome. The Norrmalmstorg robbery in August 1973 is one of history's most unusual hostage situations in history. It not only ended with an escape from captivity, but also gave birth to a new term that confused behavior specialists for years. Stockholm Syndrome describes the unexpected bond between captives and captors, where they become codependent and rely on each other. On August 23, 1973, Jan Erik Olsson, a criminal on patrol, walked into Stockholm's Kreditbanken with a submachine gun. He fired into the ceiling and took 4 employees hostage, demanding the release of his friend, Clark Olofsson, a getaway car, and ransom money. The standoff lasted 6 days and revealed a surprising psychological shift. After Olofsson joined Olsson in the bank, the hostages began sympathizing with their captors. They were allowed some freedom inside the vault and were reassured they wouldn't be harmed. Over time, they lost trust in the police and started trusting their captors more, even refusing to help the police with rescue efforts. One hostage called Sweden's prime minister, pleading for the captors' demands to be met for their own safety. They even rejected help from the police, preferring the care of Olsson and Olofsson. On the 6th day, police ended the standoff with tear gas. All hostages were rescued unharmed, and the captors were arrested. Shockingly, the hostages defended their captors, refused to testify against them, and some even stayed in touch afterward. This strange reaction confused psychologists and led to the term Stockholm Syndrome. Number 7. Wetzler and Rudolf in Auschwitz. Unlike most escape attempts, Alfréd Wetzler and Rudolf Vrba's escape from Auschwitz aimed to expose the atrocities of the concentration camp to the world. As Slovak Jews imprisoned for years, they meticulously studied the camp's layout and operations, particularly the systematic extermination in the gas chambers, knowing their survival could reveal critical evidence of Nazi crimes. The plan hinged on careful timing and deception. They identified a hollow space near a woodpile on the camp's perimeter to hide, and masked their scent with tobacco soaked in gasoline to evade tracking dogs. On April 7, 1944, they disappeared during a moment of divided guard attention and hid for 3 days, motionless and undetected, until the search was called off. Emerging from their hiding spot, Wetzler and Vrba began a dangerous journey to Slovakia, traveling by night and hiding during the day. They navigated hostile territory, evading patrols and enduring hunger and exhaustion. After 10 days, they reached the Slovakian border and contacted the local Jewish council. Their testimony, known as the Vrba-Wetzler Report, detailed Auschwitz's layout, the crematoria, and deportation operations. It became one of the earliest, most detailed accounts of the Holocaust, reaching Allied governments and Jewish organizations. The report directly influenced efforts to warn Hungarian Jews of their impending deportation, saving countless lives. Number 6. The Sobibor Uprising. Sobibor, located in Nazi-occupied Poland, was an extermination camp built to carry out mass killings of Jews. Escape seemed impossible, with the camp surrounded by barbed wire, watchtowers, and minefields, while heavily armed guards patrolled constantly. Despite this, prisoners organized the Sobibor Uprising on October 14, 1943, which became one of the most remarkable acts of resistance during the Holocaust. Almost everyone sent to Sobibor was killed within hours. Those spared were forced into labor under constant threat of execution. By mid-1943, prisoners discovered the camp would soon be dismantled, meaning they would likely be killed. With no time to lose, they decided to fight back. Led by Leon Feldhendler, a Polish Jew, and Alexander Pecherski, a Soviet Jewish POW, the prisoners planned to kill SS officers in quick, isolated attacks and lead a mass breakout. Over weeks, they smuggled weapons like axes and knives and carefully studied the guards' routines, knowing discovery would mean death. On October 14th, they ambushed and killed 11 SS officers and several guards before the alarm was raised. Chaos broke out as prisoners rushed for the gates or cut through fences, all while dodging gunfire and navigating minefields. Of the 600 prisoners, only 300 managed to escape into the surrounding forests. The Nazis launched a massive manhunt, capturing or killing many escapees. But around 50 survived the war, Some joined partisan groups to continue fighting the Nazis. The uprising disrupted Nazi plans and led the camp to being dismantled, erasing evidence of its crimes. Number 5. Stalag Luft 1. The climbers' escape from Stalag Luft 1 during World War II was a daring feat of teamwork. Located in Barth, Germany, the Luftwaffe-operated prisoner of war camp held captured Allied airmen under heavy guard, surrounded by barbed wire, watchtowers, and floodlights. Despite the challenges, a group of British prisoners came up with a bold plan to scale the fences rather than dig tunnels. By late 1943, the escapees had spent months crafting makeshift climbing equipment from scavenged materials. Grappling hooks were made out of bed frames and metal scraps, and attached to ropes made from unraveled blankets and clothing. They meticulously studied the guards' routines and coordinated efforts to divert attention during critical moments. On the night of the escape, they moved under the cover of darkness in small groups, timing their actions with the guards' patrols. Using their improvised equipment, the climbers hurled grappling hooks over the barbed wire and began their ascent. The process was fraught with danger, as sharp edges and old ropes could have given them away at any moment. Still, one by one, the men scaled the fences and descended on the other side. Once outside, they faced the daunting task of navigating Nazi-controlled territory to reach Allied lines. Traveling at night and hiding by day, they relied on basic maps and limited supplies while evading patrols. The surrounding area was heavily monitored, forcing the escapees to rely on their resourcefulness and determination. Several of the climbers successfully evaded capture and made it back to Allied territory, a testament to their ingenuity and will to escape. Their daring escape remains one of the most creative and courageous acts of resistance during World War II. Number 4. Catch Me If You Can. Frank Abagnale, the con artist behind the movie Catch Me If You Can, wasn't just a master of fraud, he was also an expert at escaping custody. Throughout his criminal career, he pulled off several escapes that showed how quick and clever he really was. In 1969, after being arrested in France and sent back to the United States, Abagnale managed to escape custody at New York's JFK Airport. He slipped into the crowd of travelers and casually walked out of the terminal without anyone noticing, leaving authorities scrambling to find him. Later that year, he pulled off his most famous escape from a low-security detention center in Atlanta, Georgia. Taking advantage of a mix-up, Abagnale convinced a guard he was an undercover prison inspector there to check the facility. He even forged a fake ID badge and got another prisoner to pose as his assistant. With everything in place, he calmly walked out the front door, leaving the guards completely clueless until it was too late. His final escape happened in Europe after being arrested in Sweden and sent back to the United States. During a flight transfer, he faked being sick so he could use the restroom alone. Instead of returning, he opened the plane's rear hatch, jumped onto the tarmac, and disappeared into the night. He stayed on the run for several more years before finally being caught in 1971. Number 3. Billy Hayes and the Samal prison. Billy Hayes' escape from a Turkish prison in 1975 is one of modern history's most daring escapes from captivity. Arrested in 1970 for attempting to smuggle hashish, the American college student was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in prison. After an appeal, his sentence was extended to 30 years, pushing Hayes to plan his escape. He was initially held at Samal prison in Istanbul, famous for its overcrowding and harsh conditions. Hayes spent his entire time studying the guards' routines and the layout of the prison. Later, he was transferred to İmralı prison, located on an island in the Sea of Marmara, making escape from captivity even harder due to the surrounding waters. On the night of October 2nd, 1975, Hayes spotted a small rowboat near the shore. Under the cover of darkness, he swam to the boat and started rowing across the rough sea. The journey was exhausting, and he constantly risked being discovered. But after hours of rowing, Hayes finally reached the mainland. Once on land, he faced the challenge of avoiding capture in Turkey. Traveling mostly by foot and using back roads, Hayes relied on the help of locals and his own ingenuity to make his way to the Greek border. Battling hunger, exhaustion, and the fear of recapture, he eventually crossed into Greece and escaped Turkish authorities. Back in the United States, Hayes wrote about his ordeal in the memoir Midnight Express, published in 1977. The book, later adapted into a film, showed his determination to escape what seemed like an impossible situation. Number 2. Freedom from Libby Prison. Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia was infamous during the American Civil War for its overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. By 1864, it held hundreds of starving Union officers. Escape seemed impossible, as Confederate guards patrolled the heavily fortified prison. Yet, Colonel Thomas E. Rose and his comrades discovered a potential route to freedom through the basement's weak foundation. Using knives, scrap metal, and bare hands, the men dug a tunnel in secret, working at night while others distracted the guards. Dirt was concealed in their clothing and scattered throughout the basement. The painstaking effort spanned weeks, with the tunnel inching toward an abandoned lot beyond the prison walls. On February 9, 1864, Rose and 108 others crawled out through the narrow, collapsing passage. Emerging outside the walls, they faced the daunting task of traversing over 50 miles of Confederate-controlled territory. Traveling in small groups under the cover of darkness, 59 escapees successfully reached Union lines, making it one of the Civil War's most daring and successful escapes from captivity. Number 1. The Patagonian Rebellion Escape. The Patagonian Rebellion escape happened during Argentina's intense labor conflict in the early 1920s. In the middle of widespread strikes and violent crackdowns, workers in Patagonia demanded better wages and conditions. Many were arrested, imprisoned, or executed. But in 1921, a group of prisoners pulled off a daring escape. Held in remote camps, surrounded by freezing temperatures, deserts, and scarce resources, escape seemed impossible. Guards assumed the harsh terrain alone would prevent any attempts. However, the prisoners spotted weaknesses in the camp's security and, using improvised tools, quietly made an opening in the perimeter. On a cold, moonless night, the rebels slipped through the breach, careful to leave no trace. Their real challenge was just beginning. With little food, no maps, and Patagonia's unforgiving environment ahead, they had to navigate through remote terrain while evading a military manhunt. They relied on their knowledge of the land and assistance from sympathetic locals. Despite the military's intense efforts to track them down, several escapees managed to avoid recapture. They found refuge in supportive communities or fled to neighboring countries. Their escape was a remarkable act of resourcefulness and defiance against oppression. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment to tell us what you think about this video in the comments section.